Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Tanya Hallett. She is a trauma-informed practice specialist, mental health advocate, keynote speaker, coach, and a teacher. Welcome to the show, Tanya.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you very much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Tanya. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about workplaces, how fostering work psychological safety in workplaces is the need of the hour. We'll talk about all this from you as an expert you are. So, but before that, let's understand a bit about your journey, your background, so that people know exactly who they are listening to.
So it's quite a journey. I have been a teacher for over 20 years, teacher trainer. So I've worked in schools and I've worked both in Australia and I used to live in Japan. So I did a lot of corporate training in Japan as well. And I spent over 20 years doing that. In my time in Australia, I've spent most of my time working in schools, what we call hard to staff schools. So there's still schools that have very complex students and a complex demographic. There's a lot of trauma, poverty, domestic violence, mental health issues, and drug and alcohol misuse. So most of my career, I chose to work in those spaces because I found it incredibly rewarding working with the adolescents and the adults that were working in that space. I felt like I was making a difference. So that's how this started for me. And what I realized was I'd been doing this job for about 10 years before someone said to me, oh, well, what you're doing is called trauma-informed practice. But I didn't know what I was doing to begin with because all it was because the students were so complex, you had to work really hard to build the relationships with these students. And you had to use a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of de-escalation strategies. You had to work very hard to make these people feel safe because their lives had been so unsafe. So it was incredibly important that in your class they were safe before they'd actually sit down and do any work with you. So that's how this whole started. That's how it all started for me.
Absolutely. That's how. Yeah, carry on.
Then what happened was, so I'm cutting it down a little bit. But what happened was after working for many, many years in one particular school and hearing the traumatic stories from the students and breaking up lots of very violent fights, so the kids could get violent because they had difficulty with emotional regulation, they escalated quickly and they'd fight. That's how they would solve their conflict. They would punch it out. So I broke up lots of fights and it got very difficult doing that. And it got to the point where even though I broke up fights and I may have been punched or shoved or pushed, I wasn't really physically hurt, but psychologically I was getting really damaged. So I was frightened to go to work. I was incredibly anxious while I was at work. I started to feel like I had to be very hypervigilant. I got a lot of anxiety. I started having nightmares and I started feeling really, it was very hard when I knew I was trying really hard to do a job and then I'd send these kids home to really, really tough lives that they were living in. And the sort of the trauma from what they were going through was really fatiguing me. So it was vicarious trauma that I was experiencing in that workplace. We now know it's vicarious trauma, it's secondary trauma. So I thought, I had 2 young children at the time and my husband said, look, I don't think you're safe to work there anymore. You keep breaking up fights. It's not safe. You're not getting support at all from the workplace that you're in. I think you need to leave. So I left that job and went and did support work for a while. And unfortunately, the person that I'd been put with to do support work for was mentally very unwell. We were not safe in that workplace either. On one particular night, she went into full-blown psychosis. And while she was trying to start a fire in the house, and she was throwing water on live electrical wires and holding my head over the wires. And when I rang emergency services, they said, well, we can't help you. We're really busy. So you're going to be stuck there for 4 hours. We've got, 400 jobs ahead of you. We'll get to you when we get to you. So I was alone, very frightened. And I thought, I'm not going to make it home to my children. I'm not actually going to get home to see my husband. This is it. This is how it ends. When police and ambulance services finally arrived and she was taken into custody, I realized after that I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I was waking up in night, like cold sweats in the middle of the night. And I went to my GP, who in the beginning said, well, I don't think I think you're just a bit anxious. And I got referred further on to a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. So diagnosis of PTSD. So when I had actually gone through the trauma diagnosis myself, then I started to realize, well, the whole situation that I found myself in is largely because workplaces were not providing any psychological safety whatsoever. And that's what started this journey. So there was a bit of a lead up to it, but that's how I got there.
That's how you got there. And now you are helping a lot of people across the world now with your ideas, with your thoughts. So I want to understand, you see the word trauma, we talked about trauma, vicarious trauma, and for a common person with so many new terms coming in, it can be quite traumatic in itself, just to understand all these different aspects of trauma. So let's start with one aspect, is trauma-informed practice. What is this trauma-informed practice?
Okay, it's a great question. So trauma-informed practice means that when you engage with people and you communicate with people, you do so with the understanding that most people have experienced some type of trauma in their life at some point in time. So what it means is that you're essentially being empathetic, you're using emotional intelligence, and you are being thoughtful about the way you communicate with that person. So an example might be someone who has experienced a lot of violence in their life is very sensitive to body language and where you stand. So if you were to stand very close to someone or stand over someone that had actually grown up in, for example, a family and domestic violence environment, if you stand close to that person or stand over that person, that can trigger and really upset that person. And you can watch that person escalate very quickly, but not understand why they got there. So trauma-informed practice is understanding that all the communications we have, from our body language to what we say to how we say it, all of those things are really crucial in helping establish good communications and good relationships with people. And it's all about working on there's 5 pillars of trauma-informed practice. So the first one is safety. The second one is trust. The third one is choice. The fourth one is collaboration, and the fifth one is empowerment. So there's 5 pillars of trauma-informed practice. So in every interaction that you're having, or when you're working with people, you are working with those 5 pillars. So everything that you do should be providing or creating safety for that other person. You should be creating trust with that person. You should be allowing for that person to have choice, to collaborate, to also have input in decisions. And you're also empowering that person to make their own decisions and to take care of themselves at the same time. So that's what trauma-informed practice is essentially.
Right. And what about trauma-informed leadership? I thought it is, heart-centered leadership, conscious leadership. Now there is trauma-informed leadership. Tell us about this.
It's so interesting. So I use the words trauma-informed leadership, and I've had so many people say, I don't like that phrase. And I've said, okay, but that's what it is.
But it is good. Means if you ask me it is good. Leadership should know more about such things because they are leaders.
I think people seem to prefer terms like heart-centered leadership or empathetic leadership or servant-led leadership. I think people like those terms, and what they are is a mix of all of these leadership styles. Is actually they're taking pieces of trauma-informed practice to create them. Because what it is all about is leading people, but you're creating a safe environment for them, one where there is trust between you and the people that are working with you, that you are collaborating with those people, that you are asking for their input, that you're giving them choice in how they're doing their work or how they might best be able to perform in their work. And you're always empowering them to be the best person that they can be. So you're empowering them to do their best at work. You're empowering them to do their best at home. You're trying to empower them to just be the best version of themselves that they can be. That is what trauma-informed leadership is all about.
Right, Tanya. Now let's look at the workplaces. We have this great resignation. We have the quiet quitting, quiet firing also. So many things happening at the same time. All these workplaces are filled with great people, leaders, board members, top employees. They keep on giving awards and all, human resource department, so many things. But we hear about, toxic workplaces, all these places. And now, not safe workplaces also, especially when we talk of psychological, safety. Why is it that these places have become psychologically unsafe when there are so many? It's like, you see, I walk on the street, I meet someone, I have not done any checking. It can turn out to be a not so good experience with a stranger. But what about workplaces? There are people who are taking money, getting paid to do their jobs, and still these workplaces become psychologically unsafe for people. Help us understand about all this, please.
I love the way you're asking that question, because I feel like what you're asking is what everybody's thinking and they all want to know. And they don't, like, I don't get this, So there's a couple of things here. The first thing is that for ages we were sort of raised that, you were paid, you went, you did your job, you did as you were told, you were grateful you had your job, and then you went home and you didn't bring your personal life to work, and you put up with whatever you put up with at work, and you did your job and you went home, right? That was what it used to be like. What people have discovered over time is that if you bring people into work and you pay no attention to how their mental health is and how their overall health and well-being is, they're not productive. They're not doing the good work for you. They're not being creative, because their environment is making it so that they feel like they can't contribute the way that they need to. So it makes good sense from a business perspective to actually create environments where your employees feel safe and supported, right? And their mental health is looked after, because you will get way better productivity, way more creativity, way more innovation out of them. So from a business perspective, it makes sense. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that psychologically unsafe workplaces have been around forever. It's just that people didn't know what to call them. So for example, when I was younger and worked in a lot of workplaces, it was really common for my boss to be rude to me. It was really common for there to be bullying in the workplace. Sexual harassment was really common. I can't even count the number of times I've been sexually harassed. And it was really common for people to just be expected to be grateful that they had their job. The new generation of people coming into the workforce, like we've got Gen Z coming into the workforce. By 2025, they're going to make up 30% of our workforce. They're going to call you on any of this stuff. So if Gen Z think you're bullying them, or Gen Z think you're making them feel unsafe, Gen Z's going to tell you. And Gen Z won't tolerate it. They're a different breed of people. It's a completely different generational outset, because people have the words for this now that they didn't have before. So that's changed. So now people, it never should have been the case where people went to work to be bullied or where their mental health was put under strain. But there was never words for it before, and there are now. And that's what's different. People know that psychologically unsafe places are workplaces where people feel that they can't speak up. It's when people feel too afraid to talk about or admit any mistakes. They won't take any interpersonal risks because they're too scared about what's going to happen. And as a result, people's work and productivity is far lower, and they're not happy at work. Their mental health is far worse. So that's what's changed. They've always, psychologically unsafe workplaces, like I said, they've been around forever. They've always been around, but now they're no longer acceptable, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. But my feeling is that, is it because they are talking more about it, or is it because actually such incidences are happening much more with,
No,
I want to understand.
Yeah, it's because there's certain things that are happening now that probably didn't happen. So I think that things that have changed are, look, short answer to your question is people never used to talk about it and it was always around, and now they talk about it, right? And I do think that in the crux of it is probably the answer to your question. It's always been there. It's always been there. Psychologically unsafe workplaces and bullying and harassment and stressing people out and overworking them, I think has always been there. It's just that now people know that they're not allowed to do it to them anymore. That's the difference.
So it's the generation Z which is actually making the difference and
so.
actually want. So in a way, they are telling that they will now rewrite the workplace vocabulary, and that it is, instead of A, B, or C, it has to begin from Z.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what Gen Z is doing is, there's a lot of people saying that Gen Z are very difficult to work with. They require a lot of effort. They're harder to manage. I don't think it's necessarily that they're harder to manage. I think the way that you manage them has to be very different. And I think that old tactics that people used to work and get away with will not work on Gen Z. If you're being rude to someone from a younger generation, they will tell you that you are, and they will tell you it's unacceptable. It should have always been that way, but it never was. And same as sexual harassment in the workplace, that should never have been acceptable either, but it went on for so many years before people even named what it was. And if you do that to Gen Z now, my goodness, you would never get away with it. They'll call you on it straight away because they've been taught it's not appropriate behavior. So we've got a brand new generation of people coming through, and they're way more knowledgeable about mental health. They're way more knowledgeable about psychological safety. They're way more knowledgeable about things like bullying and harassment and racism and ageism and sexism, and they won't tolerate it.
Right, Tanya. So you see, in corporate, there is this whole concept of putting everything in numbers, statistics. They worry about where this major chunk of their revenue is coming from, which department is bringing in, which country is bringing in, where is it? Which department is creating the maximum amount of workplace psychological unsafe places? Help us understand.
That is a really difficult question to answer because this is going to be different depending on your workplace, and it will be different depending on your team. It depends on the manager. I can't actually give you one department because it's not as simple as that. It's sort of like, I would sort of see this more as in a team. So if you work for a team, and it doesn't matter what department you're in, but if you work for a team where the leader or the manager of that team does not prioritize mental health, doesn't have any problems insulting people, or is happy to talk down to people, or is happy to put people in roles that they're not adequately trained for, or will not give clear instructions, and then will yell at people if they get it wrong. Or they will make people feel like it's their fault if they get it wrong when they didn't have the right training or the right guidance to begin with. Like, that's where you're getting a psychologically unsafe environment. So it's not about the department in the workplace. It's usually coming very much from who's leading it.
Yeah. What I wanted to understand was the department word. If we leave out the department word, what about the hierarchy? Is it the team leader, team manager? Is it the victim? Is it the victimizer? Is it the leader? Is it the board member? Is it the HR manager? Is it the chief human resource? officers. See, all those people like to have these great titles to them. What about this responsibility for this part, psychological safety?
So the one thing I'll tell you is a phrase that I always use when people ask me this question. And I say to them, the fish rots from the head down. So if you have management or leadership who do not care about people's overall health, mental health and well-being, it will filter through the team. And then it will be everyone in that team. So initially, it looks like it's the victimizer who is the person that's causing the problem. But the victimizer can only get away with it if leadership allows them to. So if you've got a team and you've got one person who is bullying other members of the team, and that person isn't the leader, it's the leader's responsibility to pull that person into line, or refer them onto human resources if that's their job to pull them into line. But if the leader allows that behavior to continue, the message that they've sent is, you can behave however you like in this team, and as long as you get your work done and meet your KPIs, I don't care. Treat people however you want to treat them. So it very much, I really think a lot of this stems from who your leaders are first. Who is your leader? Who is your team leader? Who is the person, or who are the group of people who are leading the organization? And if they really don't care about people's health and well-being, people can sense it, because the bullies in a team know whether they're going to get pulled up for their bad behavior or whether they're not, because they're very good at figuring out what they can get away with and what they can't get away with. So people who have got no interest in a workplace other than, filling up their own resume, but they don't care about how their relationships are with their staff, and the leader lets them get away with that and doesn't promote a team culture and a team approach to psychological safety, well, it's very difficult to change that. So I think it very much comes from leadership before it comes from anybody else. They've got to set the example. All leaders have to set the example first.
Right. And so they don't take any action. And when it goes out of hand, it goes out in the public, in the press, in the legal, in the legal system. Then everybody rushes to put it all under the carpet. The whole system comes together and create problems for the one who is blowing that whistle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because no one likes to be a whistleblower. It's really tough being that person who stands up and says, actually, what you are all doing is not at all appropriate. It is not safe. It is not legal. And if you have situations like certain environments where it's very competitive, for example, like if you've got a really competitive environment and you're just happy to have the job, then you are probably likely to keep your mouth shut about lots of types of behavior, because the response that you're going to get is, well, you know what, if you walk out of this job tomorrow, I've got 200 other people that'll fill it. So environments where it's very competitive or cutthroat can get away with this a lot more, because people know that making waves will get them into trouble. And that's why there really needs to be a lot more protection around people who do whistleblow. There needs to be a lot more protection around that person. And the other thing is if you've got one person who's standing up to it and the rest of the team doesn't back that person, you throw them under the bus. That's where a lot of these problems start. And that's why these sorts of approaches need to be leadership first, that filters it down to the team. And it's got to be everybody in this together. So when the one person stands out and does the wrong thing, everybody's going to call them on that, and they can't get away with it. But sweeping things under the carpet only ever makes the problem worse.
Right. And so what is the solution then, Tanya? The leadership is busy. They have to go for seminars, webinars, thought leadership. They have to look at the revenue, top line, bottom line, so many things, golf courses, imposter syndrome has also come in. Sometimes people take refuge of that. Some people really suffer. Some people take refuge of that. Some people say my work-life balance has gone for a toss. So where does a victim seek help from? Is it again always the legal system, or is it there is a better way to find within the system?
I think that I think that essentially what's got to happen is workplaces have to actually realize that, okay, here's an example. If you were welding something and you weren't wearing your helmet and sparks were flying into your eyes, people would say, this is not safe. Stop what you're doing, wear a mask and continue doing what you're doing. Creating psychological safety needs to be looked at. It is exactly the same thing. So when people see things that are happening, it's like the sparks flying in your eyes. Someone is going to get injured sooner or later. And then you're not going to be able to keep it out of the press. And it could potentially destroy the whole organization. People need to actually start focusing on prevention of this now rather than wait before the problem begins. When the problem begins, it's not that it's too late, but you've certainly, because you can always correct culture. But what you should be doing, or what the solution really is to start with prevention. Prevention is always going to be better than cure. So getting on top of this stuff early and creating a positive work culture where people support each other and bullying and harassment is not tolerated is going to be your first step. If you have not created that culture, and I know leaders are busy, everybody's busy, but it's like this is short-term pain for long-term gain. You are going to have so many more problems down the track if you don't invest in proper leadership and team building now. And if people are having problems, then they need to reach out for coaching. They need to reach out for training. They need to reach out to experts that are in the field who can consult, who can tell them what they might need to do to help fix their organization. And the sooner they reach out, the better it's going to be for them. So the solution is, A, don't wait till the problem if you can do it before the problem starts, that's great. B, if the problem's already started, you need to start and you need to act early on getting help and getting advice of what to do. And C, pretending it doesn't exist or it's someone else's problem is always going to lead to much more trouble down the track.
Absolutely. One last question to you, Tanya, is that, you see, what's the role of the human resource department here? See, they seem to be, my perception is that they seem to be existing only when somebody has to be onboarded. Then they show them their cubicle or whatever it is that this is. And then later on, if they have to show somebody the door, that is when they exist. Once you come into the company, you don't seem to find those people. The department does not exist at all. Is it invisible? Is it time to just close down these HR departments in so many places? Or is it some places they are doing the job and many of the places they are not? Well, how can they they're humans, how can they make themselves relevant in such a crucial issue as this?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question. There's sort of multiple facets to that. There's multiple, and it's not an easy question to answer because, I mean, it depends. Now, in Australia, most human resources departments spend a lot of time putting out fires. I don't mean actual fires, but I mean fires between people and work issues. So human resources tends to be very involved in doing that. But a lot of human resource people are also not, like, for example, a lot of them are not trauma informed. A lot of them, many people in human resources, you might get someone who's amazing, but you might get someone who lacks a great deal of emotional intelligence, and then they make the problem worse themselves, right? So I think what's important is, for example, work health and safety, human resources, like, I think we need to stop working in silos. People need to stop segregating departments. It needs to be a together approach, because I think that one of the big mistakes places make is, oh, well, you're in charge of that problem and you're in charge of that problem and you're in charge of that problem. And that's very nice in theory, but in practice, it doesn't work. Departments actually need to be involved with each other. So human resources can't kind of be this like department that stays off to the side. They need to be involved in the teams. So I think there needs to be much less of siloed team working, because I think that causes a huge amount of problems in workforces, because people don't know what the other part's doing and they're not seeing what's going on. So people need to be, they need to really be enmeshed in each other's work. There needs to be a breakdown of segregation. Everybody needs to really be together.
Absolutely. Everybody needs to be together. And
Mm.
I'm sure a lot of people will learn out of all these things that you have talked. There is much to learn about all these things from you, Tanya. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to learn more about you, more from you, be your client. So, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So you can go to my website, which is www.tipt.com.au, or you can email me at tanya@tipt.com.au. Or I'm also on LinkedIn. Whichever way you want to reach out to me, and I will get back to you because I'd love to help.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.